The tow truck driver jumped back as the Jeep's engine roared to life, by itself. From under its military camouflage netting, blinking red lights lit up the dash, a hidden scanner beeped, and a robotic voice calmly stated, "Unauthorized towing detected. Initiating lockdown protocol." Karen screamed from the sidewalk, demanding the Jeep be towed immediately, but the driver was frozen in place, staring at the dash like he'd just opened a cursed tomb. A black SUV turned the corner, unmarked but unmistakably federal. Two men in tactical gear stepped out, stone-faced, scanning the area like they were entering a hostile zone. The entire street fell silent as one of them walked straight to Karen and asked for identification. She blinked, confused, and pointed at the Jeep. "That's just some junk vehicle blocking the street," she shouted. But what she didn't know was that this wasn't just a Jeep. It was part of a classified recon drill, authorized by the Department of Defense, and she had just interfered with a live operation. And me? I was standing on the porch sipping coffee, watching the disaster unfold like it was my personal Saturday morning cartoon. 2 days earlier, I had returned home from base on a special assignment. I wasn't allowed to say much, not even to my neighbors, but I had full clearance to park the Recon modified Jeep anywhere in my designated drill zone. The suburban cul-de-sac I lived in was quiet, ideal for testing neighborhood surveillance response. My team and I had been embedded in various parts of the area to test not only signal integrity, but how well civilians and local jurisdictions cooperated, or failed to. I had parked my camouflaged vehicle directly in front of my house. It was technically my legal parking spot, and clearly tagged with a small red military sticker that read, "Authorized Operation Vehicle 107 Alpha." I didn't expect trouble. I should have known better. Karen, the HOA president, was the kind of woman who woke up every morning already angry at the world. She patrolled the streets with a clipboard, a whistle, and a pair of sunglasses that never left her face, even at night. Everyone on the street knew her reputation: aggressive, nosy, and ruthlessly committed to enforcing her own warped version of the HOA handbook. It didn't matter that the actual handbook hadn't been updated in 5 years. She carried around a dog-eared printed copy full of notes she'd scribbled in red pen. Within hours of my return, she had already taken photos of my Jeep, knocked on my door twice, and left 3 notes taped to the windshield. One of them simply read, "Remove this eyesore," in capital letters, underlined 5 times. When I opened the door that 3rd time and saw her on my porch with that same clipboard and a smug expression, I calmly asked if she'd read the red sticker. She brushed it off, saying, "Anyone can print a fake sticker these days. Don't think you can bring military junk into a family neighborhood and call it a patriotic act." I tried to explain that I was a terrain safety engineer on temporary federal assignment, but she interrupted me mid-sentence. "If that vehicle isn't gone by morning, I'm calling the tow company," she said, poking my chest with her pen like she was delivering a final verdict. Then she turned and marched down the street, barking at a neighbor's dog for peeing on the curb. I radioed in that evening, letting my CO know that civilian resistance had begun earlier than expected. He chuckled and told me to observe and report for now. The whole point of the drill was to test tolerance, response, and how local governance played out under subtle military activity. I set up my observation gear, prepped the Jeep's onboard defense and diagnostic systems, and waited. Morning arrived with a screeching set of brakes and the hiss of hydraulic lift. I stepped outside just as a massive red tow truck with a flaming hawk decal pulled up beside the Jeep. Rick, the driver, hopped out like he owned the world, wearing a big red towing uniform and chewing gum like it was made of concrete. Karen was standing beside him, pointing and smiling like a proud mom watching her kid win a spelling bee. "There it is," she said. "I told you it was abandoned and illegal. Hook it up." Rick nodded and didn't even pause to read the military tag. He lowered the bed and climbed aboard, reaching for the winch control. That's when the Jeep buzzed. A low, metallic sound emerged from the undercarriage. Red LEDs blinked to life along the frame. A subtle hum started vibrating the air. Rick paused, confused, and leaned closer. The Jeep security voice, female and eerily calm, said, "Tow attempt detected. Federal override engaged." Then the driver's side door locked with an audible snap, and the tires shifted slightly inward, locking down into a movable position. Karen looked baffled for half a second, then shouted, "What is that thing? Is that legal?" Rick stepped back and looked at me, for the first time realizing maybe this wasn't a junk vehicle after all. I walked toward them, calm as ever, and said, "You might want to step away. You've activated the vehicle's defense alert." He laughed nervously, assuming I was joking, until a high-frequency chirp emitted from the front sensor and his own tow truck dashboard went black. The truck's power was dead. No lights, no movement, just silence. Then the SUVs arrived. They didn't blast sirens. They didn't need to. Just the sight of them was enough to shift the energy in the street. Black, unmarked, with tinted windows and silent engines, they rolled to a halt beside Karen's Prius. Two men stepped out, short sleeves, tactical belts, earpieces. One held a tablet, the other scanned the Jeep with a handheld reader. "Operator 7?" one asked, looking directly at me. I nodded. He handed me a secure envelope and gave a quick nod. Response recorded. Protocol validated. Civilians interfering. I motioned toward Karen, who by this point had gone from smug to shrieking. "I didn't know. He said it was military. He's lying. That's not even a real uniform," she shouted, waving her phone wildly. The taller agent stepped toward her. "Ma'am, we're going to need identification and a statement. You are now part of an active Department of Defense investigation." That sentence alone drained the color from her face. As Karen was escorted to the sidewalk to sit with a second agent, Rick, still pale and holding his useless tow control, walked over to me and said, "Look, man, I didn't know. She just said it was some guy with a junk truck." I shrugged and replied, "Now you know." I patted him on the shoulder and walked back toward my porch, where my coffee had gone lukewarm. I sat down and watched as the agents debriefed the tow truck company, scanned Karen's phone for video evidence, and logged the incident into a federal tablet. Across the street, a few neighbors peeked out from behind curtains. One of them, old Mr. Gordon, raised a mug and gave me a thumbs up. Another mouthed, "About time." Karen had been terrorizing this neighborhood for years, and today, her reign hit a military-grade wall. As the SUVs drove away and the Jeep returned to standby mode, Karen sat frozen on the curb, clutching her clipboard like it was a flotation device. She had no idea this was just the beginning. The real drill hadn't even started yet. Rick didn't even finish backing out of the driveway. After the blackout on his tow truck and the quiet but crystal-clear message from federal agents, he just stood there for a few more seconds, blinking like a man who had seen the edge of the simulation and didn't like what he found. He muttered something about needing a smoke and shuffled back to his cab, probably questioning every job he'd ever taken. The street, usually filled with kids riding bikes and neighbors walking dogs, now felt like a movie set after the director yells cut. Silent, tense, waiting for someone to say something normal again. But there was nothing normal about what just happened, and Karen knew it. She just wouldn't admit it. Karen tried to recover her image by pacing dramatically on the sidewalk and talking into her phone, clearly making up a story for whoever was unfortunate enough to answer. "Yes, I called it in. There's this situation. Military types showed up. No, I'm not under arrest. Of course not." They were confused, clearly. Probably some mix-up. She shot me a glance like I was going to back up her lies. I didn't. I simply stood there with my arms crossed, letting the still glowing red LED on the Jeep's dash speak for itself. The neighbors, who had kept their distance until the feds left, began emerging cautiously, pretending to water plants or check mail, all while watching the circus unravel. Karen approached me like we were old friends having a disagreement over fence color. "Listen," she said, her voice syrupy with forced calm, I think this all just got blown out of proportion. You never told me it was a real military vehicle. I blinked. I literally told you it was part of a sanctioned recon drill and had an official clearance tag. She waved it off with a dismissive hand. Yes, but I thought that was just, like a pretend training thing. I didn't think it counted. I let the silence hang. She was digging herself deeper with every word, and I wasn't about to toss her a ladder. Later that day, I received a formal debrief packet slid under my front door. It was from my commanding officer, disguised as a flyer for a fictional landscaping company, per protocol. The contents thanked me for handling the civilian encounter without escalation and confirmed the neighborhood had been flagged for further behavioral analysis due to civilian interference. I wasn't surprised. Karen had single-handedly turned a simple recon parking drill into a bureaucratic mess involving tow companies, confused neighbors, and federal agents. But the operation wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The following morning, I woke up to find a brand new notice taped to my mailbox. This time, Karen didn't even try to mask her signature with the HOA board. The message accused me of violating community standards by installing military-grade surveillance equipment without board approval and stated I was subject to a $250 fine. I laughed so hard I nearly choked on my coffee. The Jeep had a standard recon module, sure, but the sensors she referred to weren't even active unless triggered. And technically, it wasn't surveillance. It was passive environmental and civilian behavior monitoring, which, according to my clearance, didn't require disclosure. But I knew what Karen was doing. She was flailing, trying to reassert control over a situation she'd completely lost. I waited until mid-afternoon before strolling over to the HOA office, which was just a converted room inside Karen's garage, complete with folding chairs, a cork board of passive-aggressive notes, and a coffee pot that hadn't been cleaned since the Obama administration. I knocked politely. She opened the door and immediately raised her chin like she was expecting an apology. Yes, she said, drawing out the word. I handed her the flyer I had received. My official clearance, redacted for civilian review, but still very clear. You might want to rescind that fine. I've already logged all neighborhood communications and interference reports with my commanding officer. If you'd like, I can have someone from Homeland Security call you to clarify the difference between a recon drill and a homeowner violation. Her expression went from confident to cracked porcelain. She snatched the flyer and slammed the door in my face. That evening, things got even more bizarre. I spotted Karen walking around the neighborhood with a camera on a selfie stick, filming my house and muttering into the mic like she was reporting for a low-budget conspiracy YouTube channel. Here we have the so-called Jeep, still illegally occupying street space. It hasn't moved in days, possibly because it's rigged with tracking systems. I'm not saying it's a threat, but people should be concerned. She turned to the camera, dead serious. Some of us value our privacy. I leaned against the fence and said loud enough for her microphone to pick up, this from the woman who installed HOA drones to track backyard patio furniture. She paused mid-sentence and stormed off, muttering something about defamation. Meanwhile, Rick the tow truck driver tried to do damage control. He returned later that week with a peace offering, 2 cups of gas station coffee and a voucher for a free tow. No hard feelings? He asked sheepishly. Hard feelings? You tried to tow an active federal vehicle and killed your own truck's power in the process. He looked down at his boot. Karen said it was abandoned. I figured worst case, I tow it and deal with the paperwork. I took the coffee, chuckled, and said, next time you see blinking red lights and hear a voice say lockdown protocol, maybe pause for a second. He laughed nervously and promised he'd never take another job from an HOA president again. The neighborhood, meanwhile, was abuzz. Rumors flew faster than drones. Some thought I was part of a secret task force watching the community. Others said the Jeep was a decoy and the real operation was in someone else's house. A few even asked if they should move their kids' treehouse because it might block the Jeep's line of sight. I didn't correct them. In fact, I let the rumors stew a little. Nothing like a bit of mystery to keep the neighborhood interesting. One night, I came home to find a plate of cookies and a note from the Johnsons next door. "We support our troops. If you need anything, holler." I smiled. At least not everyone had gone off the deep end. Karen, though, was another story. She began petitioning to rewrite the HOA regulations, adding clauses about foreign or military vehicles, visible utility sensors, and unauthorized camo fabric. The draft was so absurd it was almost poetic. She included a rule banning vehicles with any type of recorded voice feature. I highlighted that one and taped it to my fridge like an award. What Karen didn't know was that her actions were now being reviewed at a much higher level. Part of the Recon drill included monitoring civilian responses to classified operations. Her decision to interfere, call a tow, file false complaints, and harass a federally placed operator had all been logged. My team had compiled enough to send an inquiry up the chain. I wasn't supposed to influence the process, but I did drop a line in my report. Subject K displays pattern of obsessive control, noncompliance with legal signage, and aggressive civilian disruption. Recommend full audit of local HOA policies. I didn't expect the recommendation to take root so quickly. But when it did, it took the whole neighborhood by storm. 3 days later, a white sedan with federal plates parked near the HOA office. Karen's face went pale as 2 suits walked up her driveway with a binder thick enough to level a table. They didn't knock, they presented paperwork. The investigation had begun. Karen's voice could be heard 3 houses away as she tried to argue. But the only sound louder than her voice was the click of a pen signing off on an audit form. And just like that, the tide started to turn. The morning after the federal agents arrived to begin their audit, the entire neighborhood buzzed like someone had kicked over a hornet's nest, except the nest wore pastel cardigans and cargo shorts. The HOA had always operated with a kind of unspoken fear. If you defied Karen, you'd get the fines, the citations, the shameful, friendly reminder letters taped to your garage door for all to see. But something shifted the moment that white government sedan pulled into her driveway. Everyone saw it, everyone heard it, and everyone now knew Karen was no longer the apex predator of the cul-de-sac. For the first time in 10 years, she wasn't the one setting the rules, she was the one being investigated. Karen tried to spin the situation in her favor by hosting an emergency HOA board meeting that evening. She printed flyers that said, "Urgent neighborhood discussion of federal overreach and resident misconduct," and had her minions, Mrs. Dale and the Turner twins, slip them into every mailbox. Naturally, I got one. I framed it. Out of sheer curiosity, I showed up to the meeting, which was being held in the community clubhouse. The room was packed, more than any HOA event in recent memory. People brought popcorn. Someone even set up a folding chair outside the window when seats ran out. The air buzzed with a strange mix of giddy anticipation and passive-aggressive judgment. Karen stood at the front, her signature clipboard in one hand and a slideshow remote in the other. She'd even dressed the part, wearing a blazer over a patriotic blouse as if that made her look more credible. Her first slide read, "Defending Our Community, a presentation by President Karen H." She began by painting herself as a martyr, saying how she'd only wanted to protect property values and enforce reasonable standards. She claimed the entire federal incident had been blown out of proportion by a resident who weaponized a vehicle for intimidation purposes. That was my cue. I stood slowly from the back row, the entire room watching as I walked forward and calmly handed Karen a packet. She flinched, then grabbed it and flipped through the first few pages. Her face turned shades of pale and red as she read the summary. I had received limited clearance to share declassified material with the board, a condensed version of my Recon orders, clearance number, and a brief explanation of the operation. It was official, it was clean, and it completely destroyed every lie she'd just told. The final page even included a still frame from the Jeep's interior dashcam. Karen leaning forward, trying to peel the military tag off the windshield. The room erupted. People began whispering, snickering, a few gasping loudly. One neighbor said, "Wait, is that her on the camera?" Karen tried to laugh it off and claimed it was, clearly doctored. I didn't have to say a word. Another neighbor stood up, Mr. Harris from 2 doors down, and said, "Karen, how many times are you going to lie to us? First you said the Jeep was abandoned. Then you said it was fake military. Now you're saying the feds are in on it." She tried to speak, but it was too late. The room had turned. Someone motioned to suspend Karen as HOA president until the federal audit was complete. A vote was taken on the spot. Out of 43 votes, only 2 were in Karen's favor. Hers and Mrs. Dale's. She stood frozen, holding her clipboard like a lifeline, as the rest of the room erupted into scattered applause and muffled laughter. The HOA vice president, an elderly man named Carl who hadn't spoken more than 4 words in 3 years, stood up and said, "I guess I'm in charge now. First order of business, leave the Jeep alone." Karen stormed out, muttering something about suing everyone for defamation. The next few days were blissfully quiet. The HOA meetings were suddenly tolerable. Rules were revisited, fees were questioned, and neighbors who had once feared speaking out suddenly found their voices. But Karen wasn't finished. Suspended from power, she launched a petty revenge campaign like only she could. First, she filed noise complaints against me for military engine idling, even though the Jeep hadn't moved in days. Then she tried to report me to animal control, claiming my non-existent dog had attacked her fence. She even slipped fake notices into neighbors' mailboxes about a mandatory yard uniformity initiative that required everyone to plant HOA-approved bushes. No one bought it. In fact, people started decorating their yards with military-themed lawn gnomes just to mess with her. She escalated things further by installing a homemade sign outside her house that read, "Caution, surveillance zone under threat." Below it, she hung a toy drone from a fishing rod, which swayed in the wind like a lazy UFO. I received texts from neighbors asking if we were being invaded. I told them, only by one person's delusions. I kept logging every incident per federal protocol, and my report file was growing fast. Midweek, a few of my old unit friends dropped by for a casual barbecue. Most were off-duty, still in great shape, and had the kind of quiet confidence that unsettled anyone trying to pick a fight. Karen watched them arrive with binoculars from her upstairs window. The moment one of them pulled out a field laptop to show me a new encrypted transmission tool, she called 911. Her report: possible paramilitary operation in progress, hostile intent unknown. 4 officers arrived 10 minutes later. To their credit, they handled it well. After I showed my clearance and the laptop's basic specs, one officer laughed and asked if Karen was always this jumpy. I pointed to the drone hanging from her fishing line. The other officer chuckled and said, "We've had calls from her before. Let's just say dispatch has her on speed ignore." After a quick chat and a few hot dogs, the officers left. Karen, watching from behind her curtains, looked like she'd just swallowed a lemon whole. The next morning, the local news ran a segment on HOA overreach, featuring a blurry photo of the Jeep and a headline that read, "Military drill or neighborhood drama?" I hadn't spoken to the press, but someone clearly leaked the basic. The clip showed my Jeep, a clip of Karen arguing with a federal agent, and an interview with a neighbor who said, "I don't care if he's running secret ops from his garage, at least he doesn't fine me for having pink flamingos." Karen must have seen the broadcast, because she didn't come outside for 2 days after that. A small victory, but a satisfying one. Later that week, I got a formal notification from my CO. My handling of the civilian situation had been exemplary, and the operation had officially concluded. My Jeep would remain at the property under standard reassignment, but the test phase was over. However, due to the behavior of local HOA leadership, the Department of Defense was forwarding the incident to civilian legal review for possible policy adjustments. Karen had officially earned herself a file in a federal cabinet somewhere. I couldn't have scripted it better if I tried. That evening, I took a walk through the neighborhood. People smiled more. One neighbor gave me a thumbs up. Another offered cookies. Even Mr. Harris waved from his porch and yelled, "Next time bring tanks." I just laughed. Karen, peeking through her blinds, looked out at a world she no longer controlled. For the first time in years, she wasn't feared, she was ignored. And to someone like her, that was worse than any fine or investigation. That was exile. The next phase of Karen's unraveling didn't come with a bang. It came with sprinklers, motion sensors, and a whole lot of petty revenge. With her powers stripped and her reputation in free fall, she doubled down on the one thing she still had: noise. Not literal noise, although she made plenty of that with her endless rants and phone calls, but the noise of complaints, half-baked rumors, and delusional threats. And this time, she wasn't just targeting me. She turned her sights on the whole neighborhood, weaponizing her bitterness like a toddler flinging crayons in a tantrum. It started with a new wave of ridiculous reports. She filed one against the Millers for having solar lights she claimed were blinding her at night. She accused the Rodriguezes of harboring illegal wildlife because a raccoon once showed up near their trash bin. She even called code enforcement on an elderly couple for having a decorative windmill that squeaked in the wind. Each time, the inspector would show up, check a box, and leave shaking their head. I could tell from the look on their faces that Karen's name was rapidly becoming a punchline back at City Hall. For my part, I kept calm and played the long game. I had every reason to escalate. She was poking at a federal operative who still had eyes on the neighborhood, but I knew better. The military taught me that patience is often more powerful than confrontation. Besides, I had other plans in motion. I spent a few quiet evenings upgrading the Jeep's exterior features, not for defense but for show. A fresh coat of matte black paint, non-reflective Under Armour plates, and a few new decals that looked suspiciously like cryptic military symbols. The effect was instant. By the time the sun rose the next morning, the street was buzzing again. People whispered as they walked by. Some said I'd been reassigned to a secret Black Ops unit. Others thought I was running a satellite station from my garage. Karen, of course, spun it into a disaster. She took more photos, posted a 15-paragraph Facebook rant claiming I was militarizing the neighborhood, and tried to start a petition to have the Jeep forcibly removed. It got 3 signatures. Hers, Mrs. Dale's, and one confused elderly man who thought he was signing a birthday card. Then came the real masterpiece. With the help of a few friends from base who happened to be experts in field engineering and harmless mischief, I constructed what I called the Tactical Barbecue Unit. It was a custom grill trailer outfitted with antenna arrays, harmless blinking lights, and a rotating weather vane shaped like a missile. It looked like something straight out of a covert operation, but in reality, it was just a portable grill with a Bluetooth speaker and smoke machine. I parked it in the driveway one Saturday afternoon and invited the neighborhood for a cookout. It was a smash hit. Families came out with kids, lawn chairs, and coolers. We grilled burgers, played music, and even set up a temporary movie screen for the kids. My buddies in uniform showed up just for fun, tossing a football and helping with the setup. Karen watched from her window, practically vibrating with rage. Then she did exactly what I hoped. She called the police. When the officer arrived, he took one look at the scene, recognized one of my army buddies from a local training session, and just shook his head. He came up to me with a grin and said, "Tactical barbecue, huh?" I nodded. "Fully authorized. Burgers are hot, music's patriotic, and I've got permits for every watt of power this baby pulls." He laughed and said, "Well, it smells amazing. Mind if I grab a plate before I write up this nonsense complaint?" Karen stormed out of her house at that moment, yelling something about unlawful gatherings and infiltration of private property. The officer didn't even flinch. He pointed toward her drone-on-a-stick display and said, "Ma'am, your own property has more violations than this entire block." That shut her up for a minute. Word of the tactical barbecue spread. The next weekend, I hosted another cookout, this time featuring a Recon obstacle course for the kids, complete with mini tires, crawling tunnels, and cardboard targets. It was wholesome chaos. Parents laughed, kids ran wild, and Karen stood at the edge of her lawn like a villain in a movie, watching the world celebrate her downfall. But even that wasn't the final straw. That came when I installed the warning zone perimeter around my property. It wasn't real security, just motion-activated lights, a couple of fake cameras, and signs that read Level 3 clearance required, entry logged and monitored. People knew it was for show, but Karen didn't. The moment one of the signs lit up when she walked past my hedge, she lost it. She marched straight to the new HOA vice president, Carl, waving a stack of printed screenshots of my property from Google Maps and demanding that I be evicted for intimidation through technocratic means. Carl blinked at her for a long moment, took the papers and said, "You know, Karen, you're free to move if you don't like it here." That response practically turned her to stone. That night, under the soft glow of the perimeter lights, I sat on my porch sipping iced tea while a gentle breeze rustled the flag on my Jeep's antenna. A few neighbors waved as they passed. Kids laughed from a few doors down. And Karen? She had turned off every light in her house and drawn every curtain, as if that would somehow shield her from the new reality, one where she wasn't feared, obeyed, or even relevant. Just watched. I knew she'd keep trying. People like her don't give up easily. But I was ready. Every complaint she filed now went straight into my ongoing federal documentation. Every photo she took, every call she made, was quietly noted and time-stamped. The funny part was that none of it was necessary anymore. The drill had long concluded, my orders had shifted, and the Jeep was no longer an active unit. But Karen didn't know that. She still thought the neighborhood was part of something bigger, something covert, and I let her believe it. Because sometimes, the best way to neutralize a tyrant isn't with force, it's with imagination. Let them build their own prison in their mind, one paranoid brick at a time. The final twist came when someone anonymously sent Karen's Facebook rant videos to a local news outlet. They pieced together a short segment about HOA power trips and military myths, highlighting her obsession with my Jeep and her multiple failed complaints. The video went viral. Overnight, Karen became a meme. Screenshots of her wild-eyed expressions circulated with captions like "deploying emotional artillery" and "hostile HOA incoming." For once, I didn't have to do anything. The internet took care of the rest. As the sun set that Sunday evening, I glanced at the Jeep one more time, its sleek lines and new decals glowing in the golden light. It hadn't moved in weeks. It didn't need to. Its mission had already been completed. Karen had built a war where none existed, picked a fight with a ghost, and declared battle on her own imagination. I simply gave her the silence she needed to lose it all. And in a way, that was the sweetest revenge of all. The final chapter of Karen's descent wasn't loud, dramatic, or fiery. It was quiet. It came not with a last scream, but with a long, defeated silence. By now, the neighborhood had adjusted to life without her tyranny. The new HOA board, led by the once silent Carl, had taken a refreshing approach to leadership, one focused on actual community needs, like repairing the playground, upgrading the sidewalks, and organizing events that didn't include a threat of fines. For the first time in years, the neighborhood felt like a community again, not a dictatorship in disguise. But Karen hadn't vanished entirely. Her blinds still twitched daily, and she still filed the occasional complaint, always ignored, always filed directly into a special folder labeled Karen Non-Actionable. I'd returned to normal duties, still based in the area, though no longer operating under the formal Recon assignment. But my Jeep remained parked in the same spot, untouched and gleaming with its matte black finish, surrounded by a subtle field of faux warning signs and dummy surveillance gear. It was more than just a vehicle now. It was a monument. A symbol of what happens when petty tyranny runs headfirst into trained discipline. Sometimes I'd catch neighbors taking photos beside it, grinning like tourists next to a famous landmark. And I never stopped them. Let it stand as a reminder. Karen tried one last stunt, and I have to admit, I was almost impressed by the sheer desperation of it. One morning, just before dawn, I heard a rustling near my driveway. I looked out the window and spotted her in a hoodie, yes, a hoodie, crouching beside the Jeep with what looked like a paint roller in one hand and a small bucket in the other. I didn't move. I just watched. She dipped the roller and began applying a thick gray paint stripe across the Jeep's bumper, as if that would somehow mark it for removal. I walked out quietly, barefoot, holding my coffee. She didn't hear me until I was just a few steps away. Her reaction was priceless. She jumped, nearly fell over, and dropped the roller into the bucket, splashing gray goop all over her shoes. I didn't say anything at first, just took a slow sip of my coffee while she scrambled to grab the roller. When she looked up, I met her eyes and said, "This Jeep has more surveillance systems than your entire house. And now your fingerprints are logged in high definition." Her face twisted between disbelief and panic. She tried to stammer out an excuse, saying something about repainting damaged property, but even she didn't believe herself. I took out my phone, not to record her, but to dial the local precinct. As soon as I said my name, they knew. One officer arrived within 10 minutes. Karen, sitting on the curb with her hands shaking, didn't put up a fight. She didn't scream. She just kept muttering about how things used to be different, how she used to be in charge. The officer listened patiently, then handed her a notice, a formal trespassing warning, combined with a city citation for property defacement. It wasn't an arrest, but it was an official end to her games. She left that morning without another word, and from then on, her house stayed dark most days. No more patrols. No more clipboards. Just a shadow sitting behind closed blinds, watching a world that had finally moved on without her. A week later, the neighborhood received an announcement that stunned everyone. Karen had listed her house for sale. No note, no explanation. Just a "for sale by owner" sign and a number that no one ever saw her answer. Her property went quiet. Her ornamental hedges grew wild. The surveillance drone on a stick was gone, replaced by a wilted flower pot. And slowly people stopped talking about her. Not out of fear, but out of irrelevance. She had become a footnote, a cautionary tale for future HOA leaders who thought authority meant control. I found out from the realtor, an old friend of mine, that she'd sold the house in a cash deal and left town overnight. No goodbye, no farewell email. Just vanished. The rumor was that she moved to a small cabin 2 counties over, away from HOAs and city limits entirely. Irony, it seemed, had a sense of humor. As for the neighborhood, it thrived. The HOA changed its tone completely. The once feared monthly meetings became casual evening gatherings with lemonade and open discussion. People planted what they wanted in their yards, within reason. A new community garden sprouted near the end of the block, and Carl suggested naming it Freedom Patch, which earned a standing ovation from the dozen or so residents who remembered how hard-fought that freedom was. My Jeep remained parked out front, though it eventually returned to normal use. No more Recon operations, no blinking lights or motion warnings. Still, people treated it like sacred ground. I even found someone had discreetly placed a sticker on the bumper that said, "Property of the People." I left it there. Fitting. A few months later, I received a letter from the Department of Defense. It contained a certificate of commendation for exemplary conduct during a civilian integration drill and a note that simply read, "Sometimes the best defense is letting them expose themselves." It made me smile. They were right. Karen's downfall wasn't caused by any force I used. It wasn't my training, or my connections, or even the Jeep. It was her inability to recognize her own limitations. She assumed power gave her immunity, that her title meant she could dictate without consequence. But power doesn't protect you from the truth. And when that truth is backed by federal documentation and silent witnesses, the facade cracks fast. Life continued. The kids on the street grew up a little braver. The adults laughed a little easier. And I enjoyed the rare satisfaction of knowing I didn't have to ruin Karen. She'd done that herself. I simply held the mirror. On the 1-year anniversary of the infamous tow truck incident, a few neighbors surprised me with a cake. Chocolate in the shape of a Jeep. One of them handed me a card that read, "To the calmest storm we've ever had. Thanks for winning the war," with a smirk. I laughed, thanked them, and took a slice. And later that night, as the sun dipped low and the streetlights flickered on, I stood in my driveway one last time and looked down the block that had once been her empire. It was peaceful. It was simple. And it was finally free.